Hello, my name's Pete Henshaw. I'm the editor of SecEd and Headteacher Update magazines. I'm here with Matt Bromley and Andy Griffith, who have just published a new book with Crown House called The Working Classroom: How to Make School Work for Working Class Students. And today I'm joined by the authors. So can you tell me a little bit about why you've written this book?
Anger, I think, is the one-word answer to that question. We are angry that society is unfair, and as microcosms of society, so too, therefore, are schools. We believe the education system is rigged in favour of the privileged. Working class students are disadvantaged from day one. Their birth is, all too often, their destiny. They start at a disadvantage and end at a disadvantage. Education, we believe, should be an engine for social mobility, but instead it bakes in many of the inequalities that exist between children before they've begun school. Young people from better off families start out ahead and they make faster progress. They get better outcomes. They are more likely to go into university. They're more likely to find meaningful, fulfilling employment and to earn more in later life. And there's also a link between educational outcomes and health and well-being. So whilst Andy and I acknowledge that to truly tackle inequality, then society at large must change, schools alone can't solve this issue. We have, though, written the working classroom to give school leaders and teachers some practical strategies, some tools to help their working class students to compete more equitably at school and then in later life. So we didn't just want to say something, we wanted to do something. It's our call to arms.
Yeah, and I think, Pete, that lots of people enter education as an industry to make a difference. And one of the things we say in the introduction, this book is just to help you make more of a difference more of the time. There's about 50% of the population of working class students. And not all people in the working class are poor, but there's a lot of students at school who really have issues with the lack of advantages they have from home, and poverty is a real issue. I was reading Danny Dorling's latest book recently, and we've now got in our country more food banks and McDonald's outlets. And our book is an attempt to get schools to think about what they could do differently, because teachers and leaders work very, very hard to make that more of a difference more of the time.
That sounds really interesting. And I certainly think the practical side of things is what we need, because obviously there's lots of people who will agree that things need to change, but how has always been the challenging. I mean, I've seen that the book has caused quite the stir. I think Melanie Phillips has called it Marxist drivel, which is quite a strong attack from her. But there's been some very positive coverage in the Times and other places as well. So, it certainly seems to be a book that's been welcomed in many quarters. But defend yourself against Melanie Phillips. Why are schools classist?
Well, class discrimination is real. I think to deny that class discrimination exists is, frankly ridiculous. But working class values such as humility, care, humour, being community focused are really needed now more than ever. And in fact, some people who aren't working class even pretend to be working class because they know that those values, in a way, are a route to happiness. And in the world we're living in now, especially with the climate emergency that surrounds us all, we need more individuals to be pro-social, pro-community, rather than individualistic. And I think the likes of Melanie Phillips don't understand, or perhaps she does fully understand, that over the last 30, 40, 50 years, the culture of the individual, get more than you give, is really been prominent in our society and in American society as well. So I think Matt and I, being from working class roots, believe in it the other way around. We should sort of, give more than we get. And certainly that's been a tradition of working class culture for many years.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased that Melanie Phillips in the Mail has gone to town in her criticisms, because we wanted this book to be contentious. We wanted to start a debate because we don't think people are talking enough about this issue of classism. They are either in denial or don't have the knowledge that's needed to understand why schools are classist and how they're classist, and therefore what we can do about it. And just in the interest of balance, James O'Brien on his LBC show a couple of days ago, as we sit here, described the argument in our book as beautifully apposite and had a moral rectitude. And the Times, as you said, Pete, also said some nice things. So it has started a healthy debate on both sides. But coming back to the why, I think what we cannot ignore, because the data is there and it speaks loud and clear, is that working class students are amongst the lowest performers in our schools. And this link between household income and attainment knows no gender nor ethnicity. If you're a high ability student from a low social class, you're not going to do as well in school and therefore in later life as a low ability student from a higher social class. In other words, it is social class and wealth, not ability, not effort, that defines a student's educational outcomes and their future life chances. If you do want proof of this, then have a look at the Deaton Review of Inequalities published by the Institute for Fiscal Studies just last year, August 2022. This review concluded that disadvantaged students started school behind their better off peers, and the education system was failing to close those gaps. Educational inequalities, they said, resulted in substantial differences in life chances, leaving millions disadvantaged throughout their lifetime. It found that those who had not been successful in school were then left behind by the education system, which didn't offer the best opportunities, the most appropriate opportunities for further and higher education. And then those educational inequalities translated into large future earnings differences. Now, moving away from the Deaton review, we also know that despite only 7% of students going to private schools, this cohort disproportionately represent many of our top professions: politics, law, medicine, the media, creative industries. All of these professions are dominated by this small minority of students who went to private schools. So let's just come back to that question of why are schools classist. This classism, we believe, and we argue in the book, takes a few forms. Firstly, there's funding. Put very simply, working class students do less well in school because less money is spent on them. Funding deficiencies suffered by state schools have led to a marked decline in the provision of art, drama, dance, music, and so on. And of course, less affluent families can't afford to pay for their children to experience these activities outside of school. There's also a problem with the school curriculum. There's a problem of coverage. Providing all students with the same curriculum further disadvantages those who are already disadvantaged. Now, to be clear, Andy and I hopefully make this point very clear in the book. We shouldn't reduce the curriculum for working class students. To do that is to deepen their existing disadvantages. It's to deny them the opportunities to catch up with their more affluent peers. But we should offer more, not less, and crucially not the same, to working class students. We should broaden the curriculum for working class students to ensure equity as opposed to equality. As well as coverage, there's an issue with curriculum content. Decisions about what knowledge and skills are taught are made by those of a higher social standing instead of by a representative group of people from across the social strata. The national curriculum seeks to equip students with, and I quote, the best that has been thought and said. That's Michael Gove quoting Matthew Arnold. But who decides what constitutes the best? Notions of the best are, by definition, subjective. And sadly, as we know, all too often, those subjective choices are made by politicians from middle class and upper middle class backgrounds. So in this book, we argue that every school's curriculum should celebrate working class culture alongside culture from the dominant classes. There's a few other issues I'll just cover briefly if I can, that I think provide the evidence for our argument that schools at the moment do not work well enough for working class students. So let's talk about assessment. We talk in the book about the home advantage. More and more students are expected to complete schoolwork at home, whether that's homework, coursework, revision, and so on. But of course, those that don't have a home life that's conducive to independent study are placed at a distinct disadvantage, a disadvantage which is compounded for those who don't have parents with the capacity to support them, whether that be in terms of time, ability, or money. And then there's private tuition. Let's not get into the further inequalities that are created by access to private tuition. There's an issue with exam content. There tends to be a middle-class bias in exam questions. So last summer, for example, the GCSE English language paper had a question which explicitly privileged those with first-hand knowledge of foreign travel, and that's not an isolated example by any means. ASCL have done a lot of work in terms of exam outcomes. They have talked about the fact that the assessment system is designed, it's not an accident, it's designed to fail a third of students every year, what they call the forgotten third, and it's the working classes who suffer the most. And finally, in terms of why schools are classist, there's the hidden curriculum, a problem of attitudes and aspirations, because working class students in state schools might be told that we live in a meritocracy, that with hard work and a growth mindset, anyone can achieve anything. But they soon come to realise that merit is smoke and mirrors. It's harder, let's be honest, to have a growth mindset if you live in an overcrowded, cold, damp, rented flat. It's harder to attend after-school clubs if you're expected to collect a younger sibling or you don't have access to transportation. It's harder to do well in exams if you've got nowhere to study and no access to the internet or the computer. So Melanie Phillips can say what she likes about this Marxist drivel, but she cannot deny the evidence that schools do not work well enough for working class students, and we have to do something more and something different. See, I'm getting angry all over again, Pete. This is all your fault and the fault of Melanie Phillips.
I can see your passion shining through. And you know, for those watching who don't know, Matt is a prolific contributor to SecEd, co-host of the SecEd podcast, I might add. And you often write and talk about these issues very eloquently and practically, which, as we've discussed, for schools is the most important thing. So I'm going to ask you an impossible question to answer in the time that we've got. But you know, and I'm sure in the book there's lots more suggestions. But you know, what can schools do differently? Obviously, stuff needs to change at a system level. I think we take that for granted. But you know, for schools, what can they do differently? What will your book help them to do differently?
One of the things we say in the book is that we think schools should embed 4 knowledge domains. I'll leave Andy to talk through those. I just want to share the 3-point plan that's at the heart of our book. And let me just, if you've not seen the huge version of it behind me, just hold it in front of you now, because on the front cover are the 3 E's that form our central argument: equality, equity, and extension. Step 1 of the plan is to achieve equality for all students through the core curriculum and extracurricular activities. So instead of dumbing down for working class students, we should plan and deliver the same ambitious curriculum to all students. And we should give all students, including working class students, fair access to extracurricular activities. Extracurricular activities that do at least 3 things: allow students to meet new people, explore new places, and do new things. And then, of course, we should target funding to enable access to those activities for working class students. Step 2 is to achieve equity for lower attaining students through curriculum adaptations and interventions. So we should do more for those students who start with less through adapted teaching approaches and additional interventions and support, including, for some, access to an alternative curriculum. And then step 3 is to provide extension to the curriculum for higher attaining students through curriculum enhancements. These are carefully designed, targeted enrichment opportunities that build knowledge and cultural capital and equip students with the secret knowledge that they need, that's often given to those more privileged students, but that secret knowledge, the networks and so on, that they need to compete equitably at school, at university, in work, and in later life. But Andy, I'll give you the floor to talk a bit more in detail there.
Well, I think we were conscious, Pete, to make the book a very practical book. You know, I think over 2/3 of the book are solutions or ideas, let's say, also with reflective questions built in for teachers and leaders to consider. So certainly we think that high attainment and more students attaining within the current system is really, really important. And we suggest some ideas around that, especially in building disciplinary knowledge. But we also advocate that schools raise the status and teach more thoroughly personal knowledge, cultural knowledge, and social knowledge. Just to add something to what Matt just said there about the extracurricular or the co-curricular provision of schools, we also provide in the book various different templates and suggested models for how schools can better do curriculum interventions for lower attaining students, alternative interventions for those students who are struggling to really cope with being in secondary school for different reasons. And for higher attaining students, we use the language of curriculum enhancements. And one of the things I've done, and I'm very proud of, is that I've got 3 schools in the north of England have all adopted a program I've created called the Scholars Program for working class kids, which also gives me access to their parents as well. But also, Peter, I don't think it's just about what schools can do differently. I think companies and businesses can also contribute more and should contribute more to the underfunded, under-resourced public sector. And I really hope that the book reaches people that have got an interest in corporate responsibility, for instance, because I certainly know that a lot of schools would benefit from having some extra resource that people from different professions and different companies can provide. So, yeah, we certainly provide some ideas, and we hopefully would like more. Education's packed with creative people, Pete. And we think sometimes that creativity comes out best when you're backed up against the wall, and schools are so under-resourced. So that's definitely the case. So hopefully this book gives them even more ideas and even more questions they can pose to really help give some students the extra and the different that we think that they need.
Absolutely, it sounds fantastic. Well, I think we're almost out of time, so let me ask you one last question. What realistically do you hope to achieve with the book? Then, what would you like to see over the next year or so, perhaps?
Well, within education and within society, certainly to continue the debate around what makes a good life, really. You know, I think there's all sorts of books out there at the moment about happiness. There's all sorts of surveys to tell you lots of people in society more than ever suffering from issues of depression, etc. I think the book contributes to a movement where we encourage more people to be pro-social, pro-community, and less individualistic. But certainly within education, we want to contribute to the debate about changing the assessment system, how curriculum is designed within schools. And yeah, if it does that, then that will be great, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as I said earlier, we don't just want to say something with this book, we want to do something. In the book, we set out to highlight the part that social class plays in school and in life. We think that to deny that, as Melanie Phillips does, or to underplay the effect of class is in itself a form of classism. We don't live in an equal society. Meritocracy doesn't exist. Discrimination against working class people is real. And simply trying to work harder isn't the solution. Instead, we need to do more. And many of us that work in education do so because we're driven by this desire to make a difference, by tackling injustices, by leveling the playing field, to use that awful cliche. And we hope that this book equips those working in schools with the knowledge and the tools that they need to help play their part and to convince their colleagues to do likewise. We hope the working classroom can inspire people to do something better and to do some things differently. It's a call to arms, as I said earlier. We hope that it will start a debate, it will start, a discussion, but that it will lead to schools doing some things differently for working class students and moving towards equity instead of equality.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you to you both. I mean, I could talk about this all day, so I should probably bring this to a close. But let me leave you by informing you that The Working Classroom is available now from Crown House Publishing and on various other websites and from various other bookshops, wherever you find your books, you can find it. You can find more on the official website. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but it's theworkingclassroom.co.uk. And there are free resources available to download from that website. So do check it out. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.